What if the smartest thing a plane owner could do right now is sell? Not next year, not when the market slows down, but now. Because there are signs, subtle but increasingly difficult to ignore, that the aircraft market could be heading toward a major correction. And if you're a senior pilot in the United States, Canada, or Europe, especially someone considering buying your first aircraft, this conversation may be more important than you think. Today, we're discussing a provocative question. Should you sell your airplane right now because a huge crisis could be coming? Now, let me be very clear from the start. This is not panic. This is analysis. And by the end of this video, you'll be able to decide for yourself whether the current moment represents danger or opportunity. But first, let's rewind a few years. During the global pandemic, something unusual happened in aviation. Demand for private aircraft exploded. Airlines were unpredictable. Commercial travel felt uncertain. Wealthy travelers, business leaders, and even many first-time buyers suddenly looked toward general aviation. Aircraft that had sat on the market for months, sometimes years, began selling in days. A Cessna 172 Skyhawk that once struggled to find a buyer suddenly had multiple offers. A Cirrus SR-22? Gone almost immediately. Even older aircraft like the Piper Cherokee 140, 160 horsepower, the Cessna 150, or the Grumman AA-1 were suddenly being snapped up by new pilots entering the market. Prices climbed, sometimes dramatically. And for aircraft owners, it felt like aviation had finally discovered a permanent growth phase. But markets rarely move in straight lines. Let's look at what happened next. As demand surged, prices followed. A Beechcraft Bonanza G36 that might have sold for a certain price 5 years ago was now commanding significantly more. A Mooney M20U Ovation Ultra, a Diamond DA40 Star, even a Piper PA-28 Cherokee, nearly every category of general aviation aircraft appreciated. The same trend reached the upper tiers. Business aircraft like the Honda Jet Elite II, Cessna Citation Longitude, and Embraer Praetor 600 saw waiting lists grow longer. Large cabin jets such as the Gulfstream G800, Global 8000, and Falcon 10X suddenly had buyers competing for production slots. For sellers, this was extraordinary. But here's the question very few people asked at the time. What happens when demand stabilizes, or worse, declines? Let's talk about 3 forces currently forming in the aviation market. Individually, each one is manageable. Together, they could reshape aircraft ownership economics. The first force is interest rates. Many aircraft purchases, especially in the $200,000 to $2 million range, are financed. Aircraft like the Cirrus SR-22, Piper Saratoga, Diamond DA-62, and Cessna 182 Skylane often involve financing structures. When interest rates rise, the monthly cost of ownership rises dramatically. Suddenly, that dream aircraft becomes less accessible to new buyers. Fewer buyers entering the market means something important. Inventory begins to build, and when inventory builds, prices soften. The second force is operating costs. Fuel prices fluctuate constantly. Maintenance costs are climbing. Parts availability remains unpredictable for many legacy aircraft. Consider something like the Piper Comanche or Cessna 210 Centurion. Wonderful airplanes, but maintaining them today requires specialized parts, experienced mechanics, and patience. Even newer aircraft like the Diamond DA-50RG or Pipistrel Panthera come with sophisticated systems that demand careful support networks. Now imagine you own a higher performance aircraft, perhaps a Daher TBM 960, or a Piper M600 SLS, or even a Pilatus PC-12 NGX. Operating costs at that level are substantial. If economic conditions tighten, some owners begin asking difficult questions. Do I still fly enough to justify this? And when enough owners ask that question, listings increase. The third force is demographic change, and this one is rarely discussed openly. A significant portion of general aviation aircraft owners today are senior pilots. Pilots who built successful careers, who now have the resources to enjoy aviation later in life. But over the next decade, many of these owners will gradually transition out of active flying. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily. Aircraft like the Beechcraft Musketeer Sundowner, Cessna 177 Cardinal, Piper PA-32 Saratoga Lance, and even the beloved Piper Cub J3 will quietly return to the market as owners decide it's time. Now here's the key question. Will there be enough younger buyers to replace them, or will supply slowly begin to outpace demand? Let's pause here for a moment. I want to hear from you. If you currently own an aircraft, maybe a Cirrus SR-22, a Vans RV-10, or even something larger like a King Air 260, have you thought about the resale market recently? Do you believe prices will keep rising? Or do you suspect the peak may already be behind us? Share your thoughts in the comments. Conversations like this help the entire aviation community understand where things may be heading. Now, let's explore something interesting. Not all aircraft are equally vulnerable to a market correction. Entry-level trainers, aircraft like the Cessna 150, Diamond DA-40 Star, or Tecnam P-2010 often maintain steady demand because flight schools need them. Utility aircraft like the Quest Kodiak 100 or Cessna 208 Caravan also tend to remain stable because they serve operational missions. But certain segments are more sensitive. High-performance owner-flown aircraft, the Piper PA-46 Malibu, Mooney M20U, Ovation Ultra, and Cessna TTX depend heavily on discretionary buyers. If those buyers pause, inventory rises quickly. The same dynamic applies at the very top of the market. Ultra-long-range jets like the Global 8000, Falcon 10X, or Gulfstream G800 rely on a relatively small pool of global buyers. When that pool slows, transactions slow dramatically. But before we jump to conclusions, let's introduce another perspective. Because aviation markets are not identical to housing markets or stock markets, airplanes are emotional purchases. People don't buy a Piper PA-18 Super Cub simply because it's a financial investment. They buy it because they imagine sunrise flights over quiet fields. Someone purchasing an Aviate Husky or Cubcrafter's X-Cub often dreams about backcountry adventures. A pilot stepping into an Extra 300 Flash 330 or Extra 330 LX wants performance and precision. These emotional motivations make aviation markets more resilient than purely financial assets. But emotional markets can still experience corrections, especially when operating costs rise. Let's consider a practical example. Imagine you purchased a Cirrus SR-22 during the peak demand period. Prices were high, inventory was low, and buyers were competing. Now imagine the market stabilizes, more listings appear. Suddenly, buyers have options again. That doesn't mean prices collapse overnight, but it does mean negotiating power shifts. The seller no longer controls the conversation, the buyer does, and that small shift can change valuations dramatically over time. Now here's where things become interesting for potential buyers, because every market correction creates two groups of people, those who panic and those who prepare. If aircraft prices soften over the next few years, someone considering a first airplane, maybe a Piper PA-28 Cherokee, Cessna 172 Skyhawk, or Diamond DA-62, could enter the market under far better conditions. More inventory, better negotiation leverage, more time to evaluate aircraft history and maintenance records. In other words, patience might become a powerful advantage. But let's return to the original question. Should you sell your plane right now? The answer depends on three personal factors. First, how often you fly. If you're flying regularly, enjoying your Cessna 182 Skylane, your Piper Seneca Vive, or your Beechcraft Baron G58, the value you receive may have nothing to do with market timing. The memories alone justify ownership. Second, your long-term aviation plans. If you plan to keep flying for another decade, short-term market fluctuations may not matter at all. Third, financial flexibility. Some owners can easily absorb higher operating costs. Others prefer liquidity, and that's perfectly reasonable. Let's also acknowledge something important. Aviation has survived countless predicted crises, fuel crises, insurance spikes, regulatory changes, even economic recessions. Yet aircraft like the Cessna 172 Skyhawk and Piper Cherokee families have remained flying for decades. Even niche aircraft, the Aeropract A-22 Foxbat, Rand's S-21 Outbound, Zenith CH-750 Stoll, or Pipistrel Virus SW, continue finding passionate owners. The market adapts. It always has. So perhaps the real question isn't, should you sell your plane? Perhaps the better question is, are you owning your aircraft for the right reasons? If the answer is purely financial, the coming years could feel uncertain. But if the answer includes freedom, exploration, and personal fulfillment, then the equation changes. A sunrise flight in a Piper Cub J3, a cross-country journey in a Daher TBM 850/900 series, a a smooth, high-altitude cruise in a Pilatus PC-12. Those experiences are difficult to quantify. Before we close, I'd like to hear something from you. If the market did correct significantly, would you sell your aircraft? Or would you take the opposite approach and buy another one? Maybe upgrade from a Cessna 172 Skyhawk to a Cirrus SR-22, or from a Piper PA-28 Cherokee to a Diamond DA-62. Share your thinking below. These discussions help everyone in the aviation community see the bigger picture. Because in the end, aviation isn't just about markets, it's about perspective. Some people see turbulence and immediately look for the exit. Others tighten their seatbelt and enjoy the ride. The coming years may bring change to aircraft prices, ownership costs, and market dynamics. But the sky above us hasn't changed, and the joy of flying, whether in a humble Cessna 150 or a sophisticated Pilatus PC-12 NGX, remains exactly the same. So should you sell your plane right now? Only you can answer that. But one thing is certain, the aviation story is far from over.